It was August 17th, 1943. The sky over Schweinfurt, Germany was black with anti-aircraft fire. Each burst a thunderclap of death designed to tear bombers from the sky. Inside the cockpit of a B-17 Flying Fortress nicknamed Lucky Penny, First Lieutenant Daniel "Danny" Joseph McKenna gripped the control yoke with white-knuckled hands, watching his squadron die. 5 bombers had already gone down in the past 2 minutes. Flak bursts walked through the formation like a methodical killer, finding range, finding altitude, finding targets. The German 88mm guns below were firing with deadly precision, creating a box barrage that filled the sky with steel fragments. No room to maneuver, no way to dodge, just fly straight, hold formation, and pray. Except Danny wasn't praying. He was calculating. He'd been watching the flak pattern for 3 minutes, tracking the burst altitudes, the timing intervals, the kill zone boundaries. And he'd noticed something no flight manual mentioned, something that violated every rule of bomber formation flying. The flak box was 3-dimensional, designed to catch aircraft flying level at predictable altitudes. But it had a gap. A vertical gap. 15 seconds. That's how long it would take to dive through the flak zone, roll inverted to shed altitude faster, then pull out below the kill box. 15 seconds of flying a B-17 like a fighter. His co-pilot was already screaming. "Danny, you can't break formation. That's a court-martial." His bombardier was praying. His navigator had his eyes closed, but Danny could see the next flak burst forming ahead. Precisely where they'd be in 20 seconds if they held course. He made his decision. He shoved the yoke forward and rolled the aircraft inverted. What happened in those 15 seconds would save his crew, revolutionize bomber evasion tactics, and prove that sometimes survival doesn't come from following orders. It comes from one pilot who understood physics better than his commanders. They called his inverted dive suicide, until he dodged flak that killed every other bomber in his squadron and changed aerial warfare forever. 2 days earlier, on August 15th, 1943, at the 91st Bomb Group airfield in Bassingbourn, England, Danny McKenna sat in the briefing room staring at a map of Germany with a red line drawn straight through its heart. The room smelled of coffee, cigarette smoke, and fear. Around him, crews shifted nervously in their seats. They all knew what the red line meant. Deep penetration mission. No fighter escort for most of the route, and a target that would be defended like it was the most important installation in the Third Reich, because it was. The briefing officer, a major from intelligence, pointed at the map. "Gentlemen, your target is Schweinfurt. Ball-bearing factories. Germany's entire war machine depends on these facilities. Destroy them, and we cripple their ability to produce tanks, aircraft, submarines, everything." He paused. Intelligence estimates indicate heavy flak concentrations, over 200 anti-aircraft guns defending the target area. The room went quiet. 200 guns. That was a death sentence. Someone in the back raised their hand. "Sir, what's our expected loss rate?" The major hesitated. 15%. Another voice. 15? Last time we hit industrial targets that heavily defended, we lost 30. That was before we refined our tactics, the major said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You'll fly in tight formation, maximum defensive firepower. The Germans won't be able to single out individual aircraft." Danny didn't believe that. He'd flown 12 missions over Germany. He'd seen what German flak could do. The 88mm guns weren't random. They were scientifically calculated killing machines. German gun crews used predictor sights that calculated lead angles, altitude, and airspeed. They fired box barrages, creating cubic zones of exploding steel that aircraft had to fly through. There was no dodging, no evading. You flew straight, maintained formation, and hoped the flak hit someone else. The survival strategy was hope, and hope was running out. By August of 1943, The Allied bombing campaign over Germany was suffering catastrophic losses. Bomber crews had a 50% chance of completing their 25-mission tour. Half of them would be killed, captured, or wounded. The problem wasn't German fighters. Those could be fought, outmaneuvered, survived. The problem was Flak, anti-aircraft artillery that turned the sky into a minefield. You couldn't see it coming, couldn't shoot back, couldn't do anything except fly through it and pray. The briefing ended. Crews filed out to their aircraft. Danny walked to Lucky Penny with his crew. His co-pilot, Lieutenant James Jimmy Caldwell from Boston. His bombardier, Lieutenant Robert Chen from San Francisco. His navigator, Lieutenant Michael O'Brien from Chicago. His flight engineer, Staff Sergeant Eddie Martinez from Texas. 5 waist gunners, a ball turret gunner, a tail gunner, 10 men total. All of them dependent on Danny to get them home. Jimmy fell in step beside him. "You think 15% is realistic?" Danny shook his head. "No, I think it'll be worse. Schweinfurt is too important. They'll throw everything at us." "So what do we do?" "Survive." But Danny didn't know how yet. The standard tactics, tight formation flying, weren't working. Aircraft were being shot down in droves. There had to be another way. He just hadn't figured it out yet. Daniel Joseph McKenna was born in 1920 in Boulder, Colorado, where the mountains rose like giants, and the air was so thin you learned young that physics mattered. His father, Joseph, was a professor of aeronautical engineering at the University of Colorado. His mother, Catherine, taught mathematics at Boulder High School. Danny grew up in a house where dinner conversations involved lift coefficients, drag equations, and the Bernoulli principle. By the time he was 14, he could calculate the stall speed of an aircraft by hand. By 16, he was taking flying lessons at the Boulder airport. By 18, he had his pilot's license and was building model aircraft in his father's garage, testing different wing configurations, different control surfaces, trying to understand what made aircraft fly, and more importantly, what made them handle at extreme attitudes. His father once asked him, "Why do you care about inverted flight? Real pilots don't fly upside down." Danny had answered, "Real pilots fly however they need to in order to survive." When Danny enrolled at the University of Colorado in 1938, he studied aerospace engineering, following his father's path. But after 2 years, the war in Europe was escalating. Danny felt like he was wasting time learning theory when people were dying in practice. In December of 1940, he enlisted in the Army Air Corps, hoping to fly fighters. Instead, they assigned him to bombers. B-17 Flying Fortresses. Heavy bombers designed to fly in formation, drop bombs, absorb punishment. They were built like tanks. 4 engines, 13 machine guns, crew of 10. But they handled like freight trains. Slow, heavy, unresponsive. Everything Danny's fighter pilot instincts rebelled against. But over time, he learned something. Just because an aircraft was designed to fly one way didn't mean it couldn't fly another way. A B-17 might be heavy, but it obeyed the same physics as any other aircraft. Lift, drag, thrust, weight. The 4 fundamental forces. If you understood those forces, you could make the aircraft do things the designers never intended. Danny started experimenting during training flights. When instructors weren't watching, he'd push the B-17 into steep banks, tight turns, even brief barrel rolls. The aircraft protested. The structure groaned. But it handled. It was possible. By the time he reached England in May of 1943, Danny had a reputation. He was the pilot who flew bombers like fighters, who broke formation to evade threats, who came back with his crew alive when others didn't. Officers reprimanded him constantly. "Formation discipline is essential, Lieutenant. You can't break formation every time you see a threat." But Danny kept coming home, and his crew trusted him. That was worth more than following orders. August 17th, 1943, 0630 hours. Lucky Penny lifted off from Bassingbourn along with 230 other B-17s, forming up into combat boxes, heading east toward Germany. The plan was to hit Schweinfurt and Regensburg simultaneously, splitting German defences. But the weather wasn't cooperating. Cloud cover over England delayed the Regensburg force. The Schweinfurt strike would go in alone. No diversion, no split attention. Every German gun in central Germany would be waiting. The flight across the English Channel was routine. The entry into German airspace brought the first attacks. Focke-Wulf, 190 fighters, diving through the formation, guns blazing. The B-17's defensive fire drove them off. Then came the Flak. It started as small, black puffs in the distance. Then closer. Then all around them. The German gun crews had their range. At 10:47 hours, the formation was 30 miles from Schweinfurt, approaching the initial point where they'd begin their bomb run. And the sky turned into hell. Flak bursts erupted in a grid pattern, a three-dimensional box of explosions filling the airspace. There was no way around it. The formation had to fly through. The first bomber exploded, just disintegrated. One moment it was there, the next it was debris. The second took a direct hit in the wing. Fuel tanks ignited. It spiraled down, trailing fire. The third lost its tail section, broke apart, pieces tumbling through the air. Danny watched it all through his windscreen, his mind racing. The Flak wasn't random. It was calculated. The Germans were predicting where the bombers would be and filling that space with steel. The formation was flying straight and level, predictable, easy to target. Every bomber in the formation box was vulnerable, and they were being killed methodically. 4 bombers down. 5. 6. His squadron had 12 aircraft. Half were already gone. Jimmy was gripping the co-pilot's yoke so hard his knuckles were white. "Danny, we have to break formation. We're going to die if we stay here." "Formation discipline." Danny started, then stopped. Because he realized Jimmy was right. Following orders was getting everyone killed. He looked at the Flak pattern, studied it. The bursts were concentrated between 24,000 and 26,000 feet. The formation was at 25,000, right in the kill zone. But below 23,000 feet, the Flak thinned out. The Germans had set their box barrage for standard bomber altitude. If you went lower, you might escape. But there was a problem. Descending from 25,000 to 23,000 feet in a B-17 took time. 2 minutes at standard descent rate. Too long. The Flak would kill them before they got below it. Unless you descended faster. Much faster. A dive. But B-17s weren't supposed to dive. The aircraft could handle it, structurally, but the formation couldn't. If you dove, you broke formation, left the defensive protection of the combat box, made yourself a lone target. Every regulation said it was suicide, except staying in formation was also suicide. Danny made his decision. "Crew, hang on, we're diving out of this." He shoved the yoke forward, hard. The B-17's nose dropped. The altimeter unwound, 25,000 feet, 24,500, 24,000. But it wasn't fast enough. They were still in the kill zone. Danny thought about aerodynamics, about drag. The limiting factor in a dive wasn't gravity, it was air resistance. The B-17's huge fuselage and wings created massive drag. But what if you changed the angle? What if you presented less surface area to the airflow? What if you rolled inverted? Danny looked at Jimmy. "I'm rolling her inverted." Jimmy's eyes went wide. "You're what?" "Inverted. It'll reduce drag. We'll fall faster. Get below the Flak." "Danny, you can't roll a B-17. It's not designed for that." "Yes, it is. It's designed to withstand 3.5 Gs. A roll is less than 2. It'll hold." "The crew." "Tell them to hang on." Danny keyed the intercom. "All crew, brace for roll maneuver. Secure everything. Now." Then he did something no B-17 pilot had ever done in combat. He rolled the aircraft inverted. The horizon tilted, spun, went upside down. The ground was above them. The sky below. Gravity pulled in the wrong direction. Loose equipment clattered. Someone screamed. But the aircraft held. And they fell. Fast. The airspeed indicator climbed. 180 knots. 200. 220. The altimeter unwound like a broken watch. 23,500 feet. 23,000. 22,500. They were dropping through the flak zone at terminal velocity. Flak bursts that should have hit them exploded where they'd been, not where they were. Because no predictor site in the German arsenal could calculate for a bomber diving inverted at 220 knots. At 22,000 feet, Danny rolled upright and pulled out of the dive. The G-forces slammed them into their seats. The wings groaned. The structure protested. But it held. They were below the heavy flak zone, still taking fire, but sporadic, uncoordinated, survivable. Danny levelled off at 21,000 feet, checked his instruments. Everything green, engines running, controls responsive. He looked at Jimmy. "We're alive." Jimmy was white-faced, shaking. "That was insane. That was physics." Danny keyed the radio to check on the squadron. Silence. Then one voice. "Lucky Penny, this is Big Thunder. How the hell did you do that?" It was the squadron commander, Major William Harris, flying in a different element. He'd watched Danny's dive from 2,000 yards away. "Rolled inverted, sir. Increased descent rate. Got below the flak box." "You rolled a B-17? "Yes, sir." There was a long pause. "Did anyone else make it?" Danny looked around the sky, counted the bombers still flying. 7 out of 12. Lucky Penny and 6 others. 5 aircraft lost. 50 men dead or captured. And the only reason Danny's crew survived was because he'd violated every rule of formation flying. August 18th, 1943. Danny was summoned to group headquarters. He expected a court-martial. He'd broken formation, executed an unauthorized maneuver, endangered his crew. But when he walked into the briefing room, he found Major Harris and Colonel William Reed, the group commander. Reed looked at him for a long time. "Lieutenant McKenna, explain what you did yesterday." Danny walked them through it. The flak pattern, the kill zone altitude, the dive, the inverted roll to reduce drag, the physics behind it. Reed listened without interrupting. When Danny finished, Reed said, "You broke formation." "Yes, sir." "You executed a maneuver explicitly forbidden in the flight manual." "Yes, sir." "And you survived when every other aircraft in your formation element was shot down." Danny nodded. Reed looked at Harris. "Have we ever considered this?" Harris shook his head. "No, sir. B-17 doctrine is formation flying. Maximum defensive firepower. Individual evasion tactics aren't part of the curriculum." "Maybe they should be." Reed turned back to Danny. "Can you teach this?" "Sir?" "Can you teach other pilots how to do what you did? Can this maneuver be standardized, practiced, incorporated into tactics?" Danny thought about it. "In theory, yes. It's just aerodynamics. Any pilot who understands the aircraft's limits can do it, but it requires abandoning formation discipline. Most pilots won't be comfortable with that. Then make them comfortable. Starting today, you're training squadron pilots on evasive diving techniques. I want every B-17 crew in this group capable of executing that maneuver if they need to." Danny couldn't believe it. "Sir, you're authorizing this." "I'm authorizing survival, Lieutenant. Yesterday we lost 43 aircraft over Schweinfurt and Regensburg. 43. That's over 400 men. If your technique can reduce that loss rate even by 10%, it's worth teaching." Over the next 2 weeks, Danny trained 72 pilots. He showed them how to recognize flak patterns, how to calculate dive angles, how to roll inverted without exceeding structural limits, how to pull out without losing control. Some of them got it immediately. Others struggled. but all of them learned. On September 6th, the 91st Bomb Group flew another deep penetration mission, this time to Stuttgart. Heavy flak. Multiple aircraft took evasive action using Danny's technique. Loss rate 8%. Previous missions to comparable targets 22% average loss rate. The difference was undeniable. September 1943. Danny's evasive diving technique spread through the 8th Air Force. Not officially, not in manuals, but pilot to pilot, crew to crew. Word spread that there was a way to dodge flak, that you didn't have to fly straight into the kill zone, that survival was possible. By October, over 300 pilots had been informally trained. Loss rates across the 8th Air Force dropped from 18% average to 12%. That was 60 fewer bombers lost per 100 aircraft mission, 600 fewer men killed or captured every 10 missions. The numbers forced the Air Force to pay attention. In November 1943, the tactical manual for B-17 operations was updated. A new section, Emergency Evasive Maneuvers. It described Danny's inverted dive technique in detail, authorized pilots to break formation when under concentrated flak fire, gave them permission to use aerobatic maneuvers to survive. It was a fundamental shift in doctrine, from rigid formation discipline to flexible survival tactics, and it came from one pilot who'd refused to die following orders. What Danny had discovered intuitively was aerodynamic theory. Drag increases with surface area perpendicular to airflow. A B-17 diving wings level presents maximum surface area, maximum drag, slow descent. Rolling inverted doesn't change the weight or thrust, but it changes the angle. The fuselage becomes a lifting body in reverse. Drag reduces. Descent rate increases. Terminal velocity reached faster. The difference was 15 to 20% higher descent rate. That translated to exiting a 2,000-foot thick flak zone 3 seconds faster. 3 seconds that meant life or death. German predictor sites calculated future position based on observed velocity and heading. They couldn't account for sudden acceleration changes. A bomber that suddenly dropped 30% faster than predicted would be below the calculated burst point. The shells would explode where the aircraft should have been, not where it was. Danny hadn't invented anything new. He'd just applied basic physics in a novel way. Danny McKenna flew 29 missions over Germany. He was promoted to captain, awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, and credited with saving hundreds of aircrew lives through his evasive tactics. After the war, he went back to Colorado, finished his engineering degree, became a test pilot for Boeing, worked on B-47 and B-52 bomber development. He taught his children physics, showed them how understanding forces and motion could save lives. He rarely talked about the war. When asked, he'd say, "I flew bombers, did my job." Only once did his daughter ask about the inverted dive. Danny was working on a model aircraft in his garage. He didn't look up. Everyone said B-17s couldn't do aerobatics, but that was belief, not physics. The aircraft didn't care what people believed. It only cared about forces and moments. I just trusted the physics more than the doctrine. Daniel McKenna died in 2001, at the age of 81. His obituary mentioned his test pilot career and his wartime service, but didn't explain the inverted dive. Most people never knew. But in the archives of the Air Force Historical Research Agency, there's a tactical manual from 1943. Section 7, Emergency Evasive Maneuvers. It describes the McKenna roll, the inverted dive technique. And in the introduction, it says, "Sometimes survival requires doing what doctrine says is impossible. This technique proves that understanding your aircraft better than your enemy understands his weapons is the ultimate defensive measure." Danny McKenna never claimed to revolutionize bomber tactics. He just wanted his crew to live. But his story carries a lesson that transcends aerial combat. It's about questioning limitations, about recognizing that impossible often means untried, about understanding that rules written for one context don't always apply in another. The Air Force didn't want to believe a B-17 could perform aerobatics. It violated design assumptions, challenged doctrine, scared commanders. But the results couldn't be argued with. Lower loss rates, more crews surviving, more bombers coming home. So what about you? What impossible thing are you not trying because everyone says it can't be done? What rule are you following that was written for different circumstances? What limitation are you accepting because authority says it's a limitation, not because physics says it is? Danny McKenna didn't accept that B-17s couldn't roll. He tested it, proved it, used it, lived. How many times have you been told that's not how we do things, or that's impossible, or that violates procedure? And how many times did you accept that because the person saying it had authority, not because they had evidence? Think about those 50 men who died in Danny's squadron. They followed the rules, held formation, flew straight, did everything right, and they died. Danny broke the rules, violated doctrine, did everything wrong, and he lived. That's not luck. That's understanding reality better than the people writing the manuals. Sometimes the rulebook is wrong. Sometimes procedure kills. Sometimes the only way to survive is to do the thing everyone says is impossible. Leave your answer in the comments. What impossible thing are you not trying right now? What could you accomplish if you tested the rules instead of accepting them? Share this story, because someone else is flying straight into their own flak zone right now, following orders that will kill them. Maybe they need to hear about a pilot from Colorado who proved that sometimes 15 seconds of doing the impossible is worth a lifetime of survival. Thank you for watching.